Hello, my name's Jennifer. This is my first ever YouTube video, looking straight into a camera and talking at home here in the garage with all the gear behind me. And what I'm doing now is going to review the gear that I used in my last tramp. My last tramp was one of my biggest tramps, and it was on my own pretty much. My partner, TSG, we'll call him, Tall Sports Guy, joined me for a couple of it coming in on the side tracks, but I did the whole north-south track in what's called the Kaimai Conservation Park in the North Island, sort of mid-upper North Island of New Zealand. 8 days at the start of winter. It was hard, it was grueling, it was exhausting, it was exhilarating. I'm writing a big blog post which has got a whole bunch of information about the tracks and just, my reflections and whatnot. But I've said that I'd do a gear review because I think in New Zealand it's quite hard to find a lot of the gear that we see overseas and all these wonderful YouTube channels that I subscribe to. So what I've done is I've tried to go ultralight. No, didn't happen even closely. My pack I had 6 days food, was around 13 kilos, which I think a lot of ultralighters would scoff at. But I've made a big effort, and I bought some things from overseas that you can't get here, so I had to pay exorbitant shipping to get them. But I thought it was useful at least to show you what I did take, what worked, and what didn't work. All right, so I think in this video I'll do what's called the big three. That's talking about my pack, my shelter, which is my tent obviously, and my sleep system. So first of all, and it's way over there, so I'll go and get it. I decided on, after you can see above me, let's move this slightly, there's a fair few packs there. I've made some good choices and some bad choices, and I think I thought at the time when I bought this, the Mariposa, Gossamer Gear Mariposa, you can see there, 65 litre, that I was doing the right thing for a long tramp. Now, when I say do the right thing, I like to buy in New Zealand if we can, and this is available from a shop in Christchurch called Further Faster. I was very excited. It was a very light pack, and I will post in the comments links and weights, but I think they're not as relevant because we modify, we add things, we take things out. I have modified this quite a bit. I've cut things off. There's a hydration sleeve in the middle that's useful if you use a hydration bladder, but I don't anymore. I use bottles, which I'll get into in a minute. So I cut that out, etc., etc. So my pack might weigh less than what it says on the site, but it might weigh more because I've put on lots of straps. So the good about this pack, and gosh, it does look pretty ugly when you see it like that, it has a massive front pocket that's stretchy that you can dry your clothes in, and you obviously are going to need to dry wet socks and anything you decide to wash because it's stinky on an 8-day tramp. And it has a massive pocket on the side, which now that I'm using water bottles, and I'll go through that in a minute, I really like I'm using a water bottle with what's called a swig rig. Bought that in from Australia. It attaches to my bottle, and I still have a really good, this is a Camelback hydration tube. So I like having everything protected in here. I also keep my filtration system in here, which I'll get into these in more detail in another video about what I actually took, but the actual whys and wherefores of the pack. This deep pocket is really, really good. It protects everything. Now, the New Zealand bush, and I can't see anything similar when I look at other people's overseas, likes to absolutely eat things off the side of your pack. You need them attached with zip ties almost. I've had things fall off that I thought would attach securely, and we'll go through that later as well. Is something very embarrassing I lost in the bush. So having a really deep pocket that's not mesh was excellent for that. If I could have, I would have fitted a lot more things in it. So the other side of the pack has these two pockets, and they're both fairly small. So I put a PLB in here attached with a little piece of cord, and then my toileting kit here. Again, the pocket's just a little bit too low for me to safely think that anything would survive in it. So I've attached it all with another piece of shock cord and carabiners. So The pack also has some really good sized hip pockets, so you fit a lot of snacks and a few other things, a few other warm items, especially in winter, a hat and gloves in there. Um, and the main, I think the main selling point or the main feature of this pack for me, given that I used to tramp 20, 30 years ago, and you can see behind me there's a couple of old packs here. I don't have my old Mac pack one. I think it was 90 litres. I got rid of that. It was silly to have nowadays. Is that it's really comfortable. You do end up sweating a lot because it's right up against your back. You get a pad that comes with it. I cut out the middle there just to make it even lighter, which is what I do, modify things. Very, very, very comfortable. I was carrying 13 kilos, at the start there, and after day one, didn't notice I was carrying it. My shoulders didn't hurt. It felt like a nice, good weight against my back. It was very secure. It didn't move around, and I had a really nice sense of comfort from it. It's not particularly durable. That mesh has ripped. That was basically on a day trip before. The New Zealand bush is a rough, rough place, so it's not a particularly durable pack. Now, the major negative of this pack is that it is not in any way, shape, or form waterproof. Not that you would expect that. It isn't even water resistant. In fact, it seemed to attract water. I kept finding huge damp patches on it when I'd been nowhere near water. Which was really disappointing. But the worst thing about it was when it did rain, and I mistakenly did not take a pack cover, and I had a whole set of reasons for that. I had a very, what I thought, robust pack liner, which was a tang. I will go through that in a minute, what that was, a dry bag. I thought I wouldn't need it with this pack, and unfortunately this pack not only attracted water, didn't resist water, but it also carried water. So I got to a hut that I was only meant to be at for an hour or so to dry out something that had got wet in the tent the night before on my second day, and not only was the pack saturated, that's fine, you expect that if it's not water resistant, but it acted like a water carrier. I was carrying extra water. Now that means that there's extra weight that I certainly did not want. That made me very cross. So after that, I used a rubbish bag as a pack cover. So that means for me that I won't be using this pack again unless it's absolutely no rain forecast. And to be honest, there wasn't a huge amount of rain forecast for this trip, but I sat through a thunderstorm. So that was a bit disappointing. But I think what was more disappointing for me was that the dry bag that I took, that I'll put in the description because I can't remember the name exactly, also leaked. So it was sitting in a puddle of water and water seeped through, even though it was seam sealed. This is the offending dry bag. Tatonka, 80 litre. Yeah, no, that didn't work. I'm throwing this away. So that's the pack. The other thing was a major that people take is obviously their shelter. Now I had to decide between this, and this is a 2-person tent that's got a solid inner, and the 1-person tent that I have that's a single wall tent, so it can't be taken apart. They're both great tents. They both pitch with your walking poles, and they both are quite lightweight. The 1-person one is around 465 grams. Again, that's pre-modifications. If there are any for you, you might want to add a couple of bits and pieces. And this is around 1.2 kilos. So on the first night, TSG and my kid walked me into the first hut, and TSG and I were always going to sleep in this, and my son in the 1-person tent that I was going to take. And this is the reason that I went on this journey at the beginning of winter, is because I was waiting for that tent to arrive. I was really excited about it. I still am really excited about it, but I've decided it'll be a summer-only tent. Condensation issues in New Zealand are huge. We have very damp atmosphere, and what my son experienced was a huge amount of condensation, and he's only a little kid in a little 1-person tent. But when the rain hit and it hit us really hard that first night, it made the condensation inside fall on him. Now, I couldn't run that risk of having a damp down sleep system, which I do have a down sleep system, um, because my schedule was for the first 3 nights I was going to be camping. So I could not risk it getting damp and not being able to dry it, which you really can't. If you're stopping at 5 o'clock in the afternoon then to pitch a tent, it's dark by 6:30 and bitterly cold, really not very much chance to dry anything. And obviously being cold in winter in New Zealand in the rain is very, very dangerous. So I decided to take the heavier tent, and I am so glad that I did, because it pitches fly first with your tent poles, and you don't have to have the inner clipped in when you do that. So I got to a point on my second day where I was really cold. I'd stopped and talked to a big group of people. I was on the way to a hut, to Whare Oki, and I needed lunch. I was running really low on energy. So being able to pitch this tent fly first and get underneath it with a closed cell foam mat, which I carry everywhere. I call it Rolly. He comes with me everywhere and I use him for so many different things. Sit on a closed cell foam mat so I'm off the wet ground and have a completely closed shelter that goes almost down to the ground around me was a life, I won't say lifesaver too liberally, but it felt like it at the time. I was wet and cold, and it was windy, and I had to stop. My lunch was a dehydrated meal, so I had to cook it, boil some water. So yeah, being able to do that was a complete boon. I'm so glad that I had it. It wasn't the first time that I wasn't the only time I did this on the tramp. Just set it up fly only, and shelter underneath it. So very, very glad I had that. That's the Durston X-Mid 2-person solid tent. All right, and the last thing I'll talk about today is my sleep system. So I was tramping a lot around 20 years ago. And back then I was using a Mountain Hardware Gear sleeping bag that now is very old and considered very heavy by the standards, 1.5 kilos. And I've tried a few different sleeping bags and quilts since then. You can see behind me there's been some purchases that have now been passed on to the kid and TSG, as they sleep a lot warmer than me. I think I eventually, when I get to sleep, I'm a warm-ish sleeper, but prior to that, I'm a very cold person. It could be because I'm not particularly fit, not sure, or I'm a bit older. So I invested in something called a Zen Bivy. I'll pull up here. I've set it up on my Thermarest Neo Light NXT. I think I've got that right. Again, I'll link it. It's the highest R value air mattress that the Thermarest do, and I'm extremely happy I've got it. But I will say again that Rolly, the closed cell phone mat, goes underneath the tent, underneath my mat, and I just to make sure that I don't get cold from the ground. I think in summer this is absolutely fine, more than what you'd need, but winter I did add on this trip Rolly underneath the tent, which was fantastic, because when I was packing all of this up in the morning, I still had protection from the ground underneath me, which was great. And the reason I put him under the tent is he's often wet sitting on the outside of my pack. So yeah, this is what's called a Zen Bivy quilt system, and I'm not going to be able to show you this properly here. There are plenty of reviews on the internet, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I have a whole bunch of room to move inside here. This isn't going to be a good review of this, but it attaches to a sheet that comes with it that then attaches to the pad. You get this massive pillow barn to put a pillow in, which I use a big Thermarest jobby. That's a big space penalty in my pack, but I absolutely love it. Can't sleep without it. And then I have attached to the pad a giant amount of room to wriggle around in, which I do like a washing machine every night. So I was very, very happy with that. Yes, this did get damp on the first night, but I noticed that there was an awful lot of beading on the top of this as well, which meant that there's a really good DWR protection on this, which is great. So those are the big three. That's what you call the big three. The big three items that I took on my tramp. I will do another video shortly that talks about the smaller items that I took. Thanks for watching.